Whoa, I just got a weird notification. That was weird.
I started recording the session. That's probably what that was.
Oh, thank you, Mo. I probably should have done that myself. Thank you for doing that.
It's recording.
All right. Now let's see if we can draw a line. We can draw a line with an arrow attached to it. So one that way. All right. So these two processes are going to talk to each other through a common mechanism. And that common mechanism is HTTP, the Hypertext Transfer Protocol. This is what drives the web. This is how all servers in the entire world communicate with each other. All computers communicate over HTTP if they are dealing with like web applications and web traffic. So HTTP itself, when two computers want to connect to each other and talk to each other over HTTP, we can use what are called verbs. And I'm going to list out all of the possible verbs it's a way to, one computer can tell another computer that here's some data and here's what I want you to do with it. These are the most common verbs in HTTP. Let's see if I can get these to line up. Actually, no, so for a get operation, that is a read operation, right? Please give this back to me. Me as the client, I'm asking the server for some information, all right? So I'm just reading the information. And a post operation is, please create this for me, right? So you're asking a server, you're going to send along basically a string that represents a JSON object, or just an object, and you're requesting that the server create something in the database, right? So that's a creation. And let me capitalize C, create this for me, and get rid of please. Put is update this thing for me. So there's an existing resource, but some property on it has to change, right? So you're going to update something, and then delete is pretty straightforward, is delete this thing for me. So these are what are called the CRUD operations, C-R-U-D. If you haven't heard that word yet, you're going to see it quite a bit. So create, read, update, and delete. So software developers have shortened that to the acronym of CRUD. So what we're going to be going over today is the C operation. We're going to be using post to create new things based off of user information. So the Glassdale application, see if I can line this up right, is going to post something to the API, and then after that has successfully happened, it will immediately then get all the new things, right? So here's the two operations. When you type in something on a website, you're filling out forms like a login, or you're filling out your user profile, and you hit save, this is the order of operations. First, the post happens. So your browser and your computer is sending information to the API. That information gets saved to the database. Your application then immediately asks to get that new information back from the API. Because when we post something, before the post operation, the API has a current state. We've talked to you about the word state before, and we're going to start using the word state a lot more from this point on. So when the application first loads, your application has a certain state, what active data it's looking at. Your API has a certain state, what data is currently in the API. When we do a post operation, we're modifying the state of the API. It now has a brand new thing in it, so we've modified its state. But at that point, the application code down here, it doesn't have that new item in it. The only place that has your new item is in the API. So to make the application state stay in sync with the API state is why we then immediately do a get, so that the data that the application is working with matches the data that is in the API. So the API has a state, and your application has a state. And we're going to use these CRUD operations to make sure that both of those states stay in sync as often as possible. All right, can I save this? I can. Save. All right, so how do I get out of here now? Stop share. Now let's see if I can upload that file. Where did it save it to? I have no idea where to save that file. I'll find it and I'll upload it for you guys in a little bit. So let me share the rest of my screen now. Let's get rid of that and desktop. All right, here we go. So we are going to go over chapter 6, Case Notes API, your own notes database. All right, so in this chapter, we're going to use JSON Server to create our own API. I know some of you tried this already, so I'm just going to walk through the process because I have not done it in the Glassdale app that Mo and Maddie and I have been building up with you. So let me get this set up. I'm going to go to my terminal and make that bigger. So here I am in Glassdale, and I'll copy these two commands. Actually, no, because that's different because Maddie capitalized it. So all right, first thing I'm going to do is make an API directory. So there it is. And then inside that directory, I'm going to create a file called notes.json. There we go. All right, so over here, you can see in my editor, there's that new orange API directory, and there's my blank file that I just created. All right, now place this starter code inside of it. Cool, I'll do that. So there we go. So this is like the blank array that you were creating in your data providers up until this point. But now because it's in a JSON file, we can't just do let or const notes equals empty array. The syntax is slightly different. We have to start off with creating an object with one property on it called notes, and that property's initial value is an empty array. So the syntax, this is not JavaScript. This is a JSON file. So this is just the raw data. This is not a JavaScript file. So you're never going to be putting for loops or declaring variables or functions or anything else in here. There will only be objects and arrays. All right. So now think about what information needs to be on a note for your case. So here's some ideas. The text of the note, the date of the note, and the suspect you are entering a note about. All right. Well, let me define an object here. I'm going to give it a unique identifier, just like we've been doing so far. And now there was, I guess, the actual body of the note. So what would be a good property name for that? I'll just call it note text. This person seems suspicious. I'm just writing out an example object with these properties. And then the date of a note. So I'll call that timestamp. And I'll just grab whatever today or this current time is. So if I come in here and do date.now, there's the milliseconds for right now. And the suspect you're entering a note about. And let's just randomly pick one of the criminals here. I'll just pick, however you say this. It looks like something from like, what's the Game of Thrones? Doesn't it look like a Game of Thrones character name? Torian Binns.
Oh yeah, Tyrion.
All right.
Except that's Tyrion Lannister.
And this is what criminal this note is about. So I think Torian Binns seems suspicious. So this looks like a good object. And also remember that when you're in a JSON file, property names have to be surrounded by quotes. This is invalid JSON, which it will tell you right away. Property must be double quoted in a JSON file. You do not have to put quotes around properties in JavaScript, but in a JSON file, you have to put quotes around them. Okay.
And then Steve, I think Trey has a question.
Hey, Trey, what's your question?
I was wondering, I just now found out that I did do some of that, but I don't think I did all of it. Should we be following along with you at the same time?
You should not. If you
Okay.
choose to do so, you choose to do so at your own risk.
Okay.
All right. All right, now start JSON server. Now I have to be in the API directory where I created this JSON file. So I will do that. I will cd into API, paste that in there, and we should get a very happy, successful, happy guy here saying hi, loading notes.json, and there is a resource immediately available to me that I can use fetch with in my JavaScript. I can now interact over HTTP with this URL right here for the notes resources. So I'm just going to copy that, go to my browser, paste that in, and there is the note I just created. Everybody see that? Is it big enough?
Could be bigger.
A little bit bigger? How far can it go? That's how far it can go. Okay.
Oh, dang.
All right. So I now have an API up and running that is separate from my website. You'll even see that the port is 8088. Up to this point, we've been using either port like 5000 or port 8080. So since they're on different ports, they are completely different processes that will communicate with each other using HTTP and these methods. Okay. So since the whole point of this is to allow the user, the detective in Glassdale Police Department to enter in notes, we need some form fields. We need some actual input fields so that they can record this information that we will extract from the DOM, construct into an object, and then use that post method to get it saved to the API. All right, so for starters, what do we got here? The form needs to be rendered on the DOM somewhere. Therefore, you need a DOM element in your index.html file to be the container for it. For starters, put it next to the element in which the criminals are rendered. Well, let's take a look and see my index.html. The criminals are currently rendered in this article. So let's put a note form container. That's where all the form fields are going to go once we build our component function. All of them will go inside of this article. We'll use inner HTML to update its contents. All right, time for some form components. What do we need to make? Well, pretty much the same thing we've been doing so far. We got the data provider, we got the list component, we got the HTML converter component, but now we've got a new component, one that is for rendering the form itself. So I need 4 components inside that scripts directory of notes. So let me just go ahead and create those. It's font bigger for everybody. All right, so right now in scripts, I need to make notes and then touch. We'll call it the notes provider, notes list, converter, individual item, and our new one for note form. So 4 new files, each is going to have its specific responsibility. And I will just open them up here. And we'll fill these out as we go. All right, what's next? The note form component. Let's build that next. Great. Somewhere we need this. So it looks like I even gave you some sample code, which I'll just copy pasta. Here we go. In note form. So on line 1, I'm getting reference to a DOM element with a class of note form container. All right, it's that article I just created. I've got a render function. Its responsibility is to actually do the rendering of my HTML. Here is my component function, which all it is doing is just rendering. It doesn't need any data. So there's no use notes here because all we're doing is presenting some input fields. It doesn't need a reference to the notes data at all. So it looks like up here, I need to start putting in some input fields. So I got an example one here. So just like that. An input of type text, ID of note text. I don't want dashes there. I'm going to use camel case. So what other properties do I need? Let's go back and look at my API and my notes.json. So what of these 4 properties is the user entering in? Well, they're not entering in the primary key ever, right? The database handles that for you. It's going to increment that number. So the user never, ever types in an ID field. They will be entering in the note text. The timestamp, we can handle that automatically with a date.now. So they're never going to choose the time. Because the note they're creating, it just needs a timestamp of right now. They're never typing in a note for the past or never typing in a note for the future. And then the criminal, we'll just let them enter in what criminal this note is for. So it looks like we need 2 input fields, one for note text and one for criminal to accept that user input. All right, so 2 input fields and then a button that allows the user to click to initiate the process of doing that post operation to the API. Okay. Yeah, we probably need some, I'm just going to create a field set here. A field set for each one. Hey Trey, what's up?
I actually completely forgot to ask this like when we were in class when we first did this, but I'm not familiar with what exactly field set does instead of like using like
It just puts a box around it.
Okay, just a random box.
It just puts a black border around the around the controls.
Okay.
A label for this one. Oh, it keeps messing around with my indentation. Ugh. Create a window. All right. Hey, Drew.
Hey, what does field set do for you exactly?
I just answered that. All it's going to do for now is just put a black border around it. You'll see it when I go ahead and get this in the DOM. It's just grouping things together. That's really all the field set is for.
Thank you.
Okay. So how am I going to get this rendered? Let's move index over here. So since main.js, its responsibility is for what should appear when the application first loads, I just want to see what my form looks like. So for now, I'm just going to do this. I'm going to invoke that component just to see what it looks like. This is not what it's going to end up being like. I don't want the note form to be visible in the end when the app first loads, but now I just want to see if it works. So if I come back here, and did I start up my HTTP server? I did not. So let's do that. All right. Have my dev tools open. Go to port 8080. Whoa, there's my note form. So you can see it just creates this kind of like inset border around each one of the form fields. That's what a field set does. Not sure why I made my font that big. All right, not the prettiest thing in the world, but for now, it gets the job done. Not looking for perfection. We just want to work our way through the code. We can go back and refactor and clean it up later. But your first responsibility is to get the initial process going. It is not to make it look beautiful on your first step. All right, so I got some input fields. Now we need a note provider. All right, how are we going to get the data? Well, we need the data from the API. So I got some sample code I can just steal. It's okay. But there is some new code in here. I said we're going to start throwing around the word state a lot more. And already you can see on line 3, I've got this weird function called dispatch state change event. Whew, that's a lot of words that don't mean anything. But you can see inside that function, what am I doing? I'm creating a custom event that just says the note state changed and then dispatching that to my event hub. Why on earth do I need that? Well, when we do these post operations or a put operation or a delete operation, those 3 operations out of CRUD, so when we're creating something, updating something, or deleting something, that is modifying the API, right? We're changing the state of the API. So when that happens, my note provider, what I'm going to do is the provider itself is going to tell the application that the notes have changed, so that some other component that may be dependent upon the state of the notes can listen for that event and then do what it needs to do. Let's say like the note list. It's responsible for listing the notes. It definitely would be interested if the state of the notes changed. If there was a new note added, it needs to know that so that it can render itself again. If one was deleted, the notes list needs to know that so that it can render itself again, right? So the data provider is going to tell the application when the state of the data has changed. And that's why we have this custom event here, specifically with a note or with a name of the note state changed. All right, I'm going to make this near the top. So here's my save note, and you'll see on line 20, that's where you specify the verb that you want to use. With a get operation, it's a little bit different. All we need in the fetch is just the URL. We're just saying here, just give me all notes. But when we're doing a post or a put or a delete, after it, we're going to put a comma and then a configuration object, which is this right here. All right, so more information about the fetch, more specific information. Instead of just defaulting to get, we're going to specifically say this is a post. What am I posting? Like, what is the format of the data that I'm sending to my API? Well, it's JSON. That's what that content type header is for. We'll talk about headers in the future, but just follow this pattern for now. And then finally, the body is exactly, this is what I want my API to create. We'll go into more depth a little bit later, but for now, just I'm going through the high level patterns. Did I see somebody's hand up?
Yes. This is a really simple question. It's just that header content type. Look, most objects, that can be anything as long as the right side of those dots mean like the correct thing. So basically that content type could be, like monkey butt and be fine.
No, on line 22, well, yes, you can type whatever you want into here, but I specifically want to make sure that I have a content type header on this request.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that that headers was acting like an object, like a normal object, I guess.
It is a normal object, yes.
Okay.
So again, high level, this fetch is saying, hey, API, please create this thing for me. And this thing is a note, whatever's going to be in this variable. Immediately after that is successful, I want to get all of the notes back from the API. And that will make sure that my application's state, basically the number in the values of all of the notes are now in sync with what I changed in the API. And then tell the application that something changed. So I'm just going to pause here for a second, see if anybody has some initial questions.
I just took a screenshot of that.
Okay.
So do you just have to
And again,
remember-
guys, there's really, I mean, I get if you want to, but there's really no reason to take screenshots or take pictures because all of this is going to be pushed up and shared with you. So it's all in the course. It's all going to be online on GitHub.
Hey, Steve, is that supposed to be localhost 8080 or 8088?
It's supposed to be 8088, which is exactly what it is. Good catch.
Do you just have to remember what port you assigned to it? Like when we're
Absolutely.
working on this and our daily journal and other things, we just have to remember.
Yes, you will have to remember things. Okay. Oh, John.
So for the dispatch of the note state changed event, I don't think you've talked about it or gotten into it yet, but like where does that need, like who listens for that? Like the entire event hub or?
Well, that's a great question. So the end goal here is to provide the user to enter in notes and then be able to see a list of all of the notes that they've entered for this case, right? So that's the end goal we're trying to achieve. Create new ones and then list the ones they've created. So that is two different components. One component has all the form fields where they can enter in the information and save it. So that's one component. Another component is for listing all of the notes they've created. So which one of those components cares about the fact that the note state has changed? One has been added or removed. The note form or the note list?
The list?
Yeah, the list, because it's responsible for rendering the state of the notes. So if the state of the notes changed, it is going to listen specifically for the note state changed event. So it will then go get all of the new notes that are in the application state and render them again.
Okay. Thank you.
Alexander.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. In line 9 in your get notes section, actually more specifically on line 13, I can't help but notice, is there a reason you don't have parse notes.slice?
Because on line 13 is where I'm simply updating the state of the notes in my application. This is not for other modules in the application to get the notes. This is just to update the local notes array, which for some reason I don't have here. Hang on a second. Yeah, that needs to be up there.
Makes sense. Thank you.
May I ask a question? Sorry.
Yes.
Yeah, so when you're operating in this way, you always have to have two different servers running, your local presentation of your HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and your server? Your data API server.
So just the right vocabulary is
Yeah.
the one that is serving up the files for your Glassdale application is called a web server. All right. And that's what you use the serve command line tool. That is a web server. The one that is exposing the data itself, that is JSON server. So those are two separate processes. They're both running at the exact same time on your machine.
And if the JSON server wasn't running for some reason, I would get an error. Any kind of
Yes, you'll get errors.
missing? Is it a consistent thing that I can know to see to look for, or is it just a JavaScript undefined or something?
I'll show you later. How about that?
Yeah.
Billy, did you have your hand up earlier and I just missed you?
I was going to ask the same thing that Drew just asked.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'll show you guys what that looks like if the JSON server is not running. All right. Okay. No other questions right now. All right. What's next?
I'm sorry. Can I ask a quick one more question?
Of course.
The server 8088 or whatever. I mean, can that be anything? I mean, why does it have to be 8088 per se? Or
It doesn't have to be.
It can be anything.
It can be any port.
Any 4 digits or any.
Well, for now, just use 8088.
Okay.
All right. So I've got one module now whose responsibility is to collect user input. Right? That's what these input fields are for note form. That's all this is going to do is collect user input and respond to clicking the save note button. That's all this one is doing. The note provider, remember that the provider components, its responsibility is to manage the data of the application. So that's where all of these HTTP calls are happening in fetch, right? This is responsible for creating, reading, updating, and deleting things on your API. So now we need to hook these things together. The note form itself is going to listen for the user clicking on the save note button and then initiating the process and using notes provider to get that change into the API. So let's start that process. And I think I gave some boilerplate code. Yes, I did, because I'm awesome that way. All right, so on the content target, all right, that note form container, and I can do that in here because in index.html, I hard coded in an article, all right? So that can be queried immediately when this module is imported. And then I'm immediately adding an event listener of click. Now that'll handle any click. It'll handle me clicking on a label. It'll handle me clicking on an input field anywhere in that component. But I only want this logic to run when I specifically clicked on the save note button, which is why I have this if statement here. So if the target of the event has an ID of save note, which you'll notice down here, it does. Here's where I'm going to create a brand new object and get it saved to my API. So the first thing I need to do is get what the user typed in. Let's do that. That has an ID of note text. All right, so just right there, I'm getting a reference to the input field right here. I'm referencing that input field, but I want what the user typed in. You can do that with .value. Now for the criminal. Right. Get a reference to the input field, then immediately use .value to get the text that the user typed into that input field. So now I've got two variables holding those discrete bits of data that the user has typed in and then click the save button. So now I need to turn those into, compose them into an object. Well, let's create some key value pairs. So this object has two things on it. And it's best, just to save your own brain space, to name the properties on this object the same as what they're going to be in the API. So I'm going to go to my API again and look at what I called those properties. Note text and criminal. So I need note text and criminal. What should the value of note text be? Well, whatever the user typed in, right? The value of that input field, I'm currently storing it in note text. So here's where we get that confusing note text colon note text. And you're going to end up doing this a lot, because as soon as you in your mind come up with a great variable name for like an input field, you'll find that you'll start using that same variable name all over the place, and you'll get these duplicate things. So it's a common design pattern that developers use. It looks confusing for beginners, but as you get progressing your skills, you'll notice you'll start doing this a lot more. And then the name of the criminal that the user typed in is currently stored in criminal name. So I'm going to make that the value of the criminal property on my brand new object. All right, what do I want to do with this object? Well, I want to get it saved to the API. The module that's responsible for interacting with my API is Notes Provider. In fact, it has a function on it called Save Note. And you'll notice right after the equal sign right here, right, an input parameter. That's the note itself. That's going to be the object. We have to send it to the Save Note function. So I'm going to do that right here, right? There's the argument, which is the object I just created. So we're sending an object to Save Note. What is it doing with this object? Well, it's down here, right here on line 26. You cannot send raw JavaScript data structures over HTTP. The only thing that you can send over the internet is strings. You can't send arrays, you can't send objects, you can't send numbers, you can't send Booleans. Everything has to be converted into a string first. And that's what this handy dandy built-in JSON.stringify method does. I did not write that. That is part of the JavaScript language. You can just use JSON.stringify. Every browser knows what that means. And what it does is it converts my object into a string that looks like an object. So that is now the body of the request, and it gets sent to the API and is supposed to do its job to actually save it. So dramatic pause. Let's see if any questions. Daniel.
Will you go back to the note provider JS real quick?
Oh, note provider, right there, yes.
Right. Or, no, sorry, the note form.
Note form, there you go. Do you have a question about any of this you want me to cover again?
Well, I don't know what I did before, but I had underneath the new, or the object, the new note object, instead of having saved note there, I had event hub.dispatch event with saved note event in the parentheses. So I just think I was just a bit confused.
Yeah, because save note is a function that is defined in another module that we're exporting out of this module, right? So we want to invoke this function in another module.
Right.
So we have to import it first. This is not an event that goes over the event hub.
I see. Thank you.
Billy, what's your question?
Do you have anything that's listening for the dispatch state change event already?
Not yet, because I haven't written my note list component.
Okay, never mind.
All right, let's just see what happens. I'm going to get this all put on the DOM. I'm going to type in some input. I'm going to click my button, and we're going to see if this actually saves something to my API. So come back to here. I'll refresh. And I'm going to keep, whenever you're working with network operations, these fetches, when you're interacting with an API, the network tab is going to be one of your best friends, because you will actually see and can inspect what happened in that HTTP conversation with the API. So I'm going to open that up. I'll clear it out. Oops, refresh. I'll clear it out again. All right, type some things in. No, didn't do it. All right. Now, as soon as I click the Save No button, we will see a new request show up over here in the Network tab. In theory, if I wrote my code correctly. There we go. We see two operations that just happened. And I'm going to make my dev tools a little bit bigger, and we're going to look at each one of these. So the very first one, you'll see a status of 200. And if we hover over it, you can actually see 201 means created. And that is the API or JSON server telling me that it was successful, that it successfully created the thing that I asked it to create. And I can actually click over here on the request. Look at that. It automatically incremented. Since it created a new thing for me, it gave it an ID of 2. And that's why the user never ever types in the ID. JSON server will create the ID for you. It'll automatically increment it by 1 every time you create a new one. Well, let me go check my notes.json. If it said it was successful, it should be in that file. And there it is. So I just successfully saved something to a persistent data storage. It's just a JSON file on our system right now. But the next time I come to the application, that data is all going to be there. It can be loaded up again and used. Trey, was that you?
Yes.
Right,
wait, don't. First, when you obviously when you click save, you don't have to click save on your file right there that you're on right now. It'll just automatically save it.
It automatically saves it.
And 2, and I know some people might also want this, but you don't have to do it right now. But can you go over the file, I guess the file path that like where you start to where you end with your code? You know, like you make your, what is it, Node.js or like note form, and then the notes is used here, and then the
Yeah, so in this notes directory is where I created all of the files that are relating to creating and managing notes.
Mm-hmm. And then where's it been getting used? Like how, like from there, how does it get, like get fetch and go over, I guess go over from there to how, when it's getting printed into the, on the web page.
The form itself?
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah,
I guess, yeah.
I put that in main.js right here. So for now, I'm making the form immediately appear when the page loads. For now.
Okay, it's not exactly that. Okay. I'm bad at explaining.
Any other questions? All right. So just very quickly, let's follow the data process again. Main.js imports the note form component function and immediately invokes it. So when we invoke it, it immediately just redirects or, tells render to do its job. So what does render do? Well, it puts the field sets, the input fields in the button on the screen. All right. And at that point, it's done, right? It has rendered something to the screen. and has set up an event listener for when somebody clicks on the save button. Job done. Now, when I fill that out, which I'll do again, right? As soon as I click this button, that event listener is going to get triggered. All right. It will come in here immediately to line 7. It is save note that I clicked. So once again, that is the ID of my button down here. So that's going to evaluate to true. So all of this code will run. First thing I do on line 9 is get what the user typed in to the note text input field. Then with the dot value, get what the user typed into the criminal name input field. Store those in variables. Create a new object representation that is identical to what I want to be saved in my API. So I got note text and I got criminal as properties and the user input as their values that I grabbed from the input fields. I imported save note from my data provider. I invoke it and pass along this new note I just created as the argument. So note provider. Here we go. There's my new objects that are going to be stored in this note variable right here as the parameter. I initiate the process with a fetch call, specifically with a method of post. I turn my object into a string that gets sent to the API. I immediately turn around and request from the API all of its notes, and then I dispatch to the system that the state has changed. I'm not doing anything with that event yet, but I am at least dispatching that the note state has changed. Hey, Drew.
Can you back up one component in your progress there? What was it you did? I think it was in the provider, or you saved the note. We've lost the track. I was wondering why you were passing the new note or the save note from one thing to another, from one component to another. And I lost the thread of my question. I'm sorry. Maybe if you could just go through that save note, why one is in one component versus another?
The reason I defined the function of save note in the provider module,
because it's to do with that.
Because it's this module's responsibility to manage the data.
Right, okay.
So that's why I put that function in here. Single responsibility principle, group common things together. All right. So since the function is in this module, and I want other modules to have the ability to save a note, I export it, which you see on line 20 there. So note form on line 1 imports that function, because at some point it will invoke that function. So I have to import it.
Mm-hmm.
Now I am actually invoking it all the way down on line 19. Right? That's where I actually want the post operation to happen. And I'm giving it the object that I want to be created in my API. So there's my argument.
Mm-hmm.
And then the instructions for save note will run right there where I'm invoking it. And then that's when the fetch operation happens.
Okay.
Derek, what's up?
I noticed on one you have the function render, and then you have another function that invokes that function. I'm just wondering why you didn't just have note form be that function that does all that rather than putting render inside of it. Is one question. I have another one.
You'll get the answer to that question in about 2 days.
Okay.
This is in preparation for slightly more complex logic that we'll be going over.
Okay, my second question is, you mentioned that we would be able to put a timestamp on our own.
Yes.
Without having to enter it, and I don't recall seeing that. So if I missed it, I apologize.
Well, probably a lot of people noticed that my new object didn't look like the first one I manually created, but nobody said anything until now. So thank you, Derek, for bringing that up. The note I just created by the input that the user typed in doesn't have a timestamp. So I didn't do this completely correct yet. Somehow I need to get that timestamp property on there. So where am I creating my object that I want to be saved to the API? Well, it's here in the note form, right here. So I need to add a timestamp on here. And I just want it to be right now. So what that is going to be is milliseconds since January 1st of 1969 or 1970. That's what that epoch time is. So let me run this now. I'm going to clear this out so we can see the operations happen again. Okay, there's the first one to create the new object. And then here's the one to get. Immediately turn around and get all of the objects again. So you'll see that get request brought back all three because I now have 3 objects in my API. There they are. And now that one I just created does have the timestamp on it.
Steve, what do you do with the bad one? The one that doesn't match all the others now.
What do I do with it? Well, for now, I'll show you what I'm going to do with it. There. It's gone. Any other questions? John.
This is kind of a coupling question. So if you were to, I think this is the way I thought about it originally, on the note form, you set up your listener, then you dispatch the event out to the event hub, and then on your notes
No,
provider,
here I'm not dispatching any events.
Oh yeah. So you kind of imported save note back into this one.
Yes.
But I just dispatch an event out to note provider where save note lives. And then
Well, that kind of coupling is acceptable
that's okay.
because the note provider doesn't have anything to do with the DOM or the user interface. It is simply a collection of like tools that
Right.
the rest of the application can use to interact with the API.
Okay.
So that kind of coupling is okay.
Got it.
All right, I think that was it. All right, so that is an introduction to using the post method on an HTTP call to create something new. All right, so we're not usually, I mean, in the end, this API will be running on a completely different machine somewhere else on the planet Earth. Right now, this API is also running on your machine. So both the application and the API are going to be running on your machine, but that's not how things work, right? It actually be 2 completely physically different machines, and they will communicate over HTTP. But during development, since you're now software developers, we have all of the power. We can control everything. But once it's released to production, these will be running on separate machines, possibly in different parts of the country or different parts of the world. All right, so let me go ahead and push this up for you guys. All right, good status. There's all the new stuff I just created. So that's just the first step. We still haven't even listed notes yet, but this is at least the part of the process of one of the crucial parts of any like application, web application, is accepting user input and then creating something in permanent storage that represents what the user typed in. So Facebook posts, tweets, Pinterest cards, Instagram posts, all of these things follow this exact same process. You as a human being are interacting with an application, you're typing in input, the application is extracting that input from its user interface, building objects out of it, and then taking that object and sending it to a permanent data storage, and then it's being saved there for use later. And this is the first introduction to that process. Any other questions right now?
I have a question.
Yes.
Can you show me your notes list JavaScript first?
Sure, it's right there.
Okay. So when you had your DevTools open and you made a new note and sent it up to your API, it said fetch twice.
Yes.
I guess I'm not following why it said fetch twice, because it was posting, right?
Well, I'll show you real quick. Let's go to the notes provider where I'm actually doing the post. Here's my fetch. Here's the post. What am I immediately doing then?
You're fetching it again, right?
Fetching it again.
Yeah, okay.
So there's the post. There's the thing that was created. And then here's the get. There's all the things that I have in my API state. I'm pulling that back down into my application state. So they're now in sync, that I am now going to be displaying everything to the user that is in the persistent storage of my API.
Oh, okay. I'm just now realizing that fetch is not the same sort of operation as CRUD, I guess. Okay, yeah, okay.
Right. We use the fetch calls to do the CRUD operations.
Got it.
So on line 12 is the and on line 21 is the k.
Right.
So we're just doing cur right now. We'll get to the ud later. All right, it is currently 2 o'clock, so let's take a nice 15-minute break, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about some other stuff. So see you guys at 2:15.